Alright, for this assignment we're going to go over how to do what's called keying essentially. And the idea behind it is that we have an object like this vehicle.
A doctor, running late for a medical convention.
Wait until we can skip the video. There it is. There it is. So here's a piece of footage, and you can see that it's on a green background. And essentially what we want to do is take it off of that green background and use it in our scene for something. Okay, so there's a couple spots that you can achieve this stuff. Going to YouTube, typing in green screen footage gives you a lot of different things that are out here. Here's one there. Here's some here. There's an example of using green screen footage. Ideally, you want to have the highest resolution possible, because the more resolution you have, the cleaner it could be. Not necessarily always is going to be, but it could be. You're better off if you have a big piece of footage getting that higher resolution than if you have a small piece of footage. It's just going to look kind of really pixelated. Now, YouTube's not the ideal place to go and get footage, just because it's already kind of compressed and whatever else. That's why you could also use Hollywood Camera Work. You just type that into Google, and they have green screen plates. And you'll see, as we've seen before, here's a bunch of green screen type things. Now, I don't want you to get anything that has movement in the camera. I want you to find something that is just a person on a green screen. Like this one here, there's actually movement to the camera as we kind of swoop into this. Now, we'll get into this at another point, but just not right now. All right. So way on the bottom here, I think this one doesn't have a camera movement. Yeah, like this one doesn't have a camera movement, but because this is transparent, you have other issues. So even that could be a little bit tricky. Here's, in this thing they're kind of showing motion blur. In here it can be kind of tricky, and here's some smoke. Here's sheen, so there's a lot of reflective green popping into that. And then here's walking and sitting, and this, and this, and this. This one. Yeah, the camera work on that one. Way on the bottom of the second one, which is kind of a weird spot to put it, because the second one is like more tracking plates. Here it is. These ones are good ones to use. These are Cynthia. And there's 15 different videos of Cynthia doing different things. So we can download one of these as well. I don't really care which one for now. I'm just going to download. Alright, so I downloaded that. If you find a piece of footage on here, you can, one thing that kind of helps on YouTube using filters is if you go to HD, high definition, then you get the higher resolution stuff. You also want to try to find something that's not like a fake green screen, because it just makes your work, it makes the work a lot easier, but you're not really learning a whole lot. Like this one here, you can see this is HD. Once we can skip it. Okay, you can see this is a very, very bright green. This is not a green screen. Basically what this is, they've taken these elements here, like the shadow and this, and they popped it onto a bright green background. That's not a green screen. A green screen typically has some sort of shading done to it, as is the case like here, where you're not working with a solid green. It's more of like a mixture of greens. Same thing kind of here, same thing kind of here, okay, even in this spot here or that spot, okay. So you want to find something that's really good, and I'll show you some of the pieces that I found. It's kind of a neat one. What was the other one? You can also try to find some other footage like birds flying. Because we're not strictly going with green screens. I want to also show how to pull other items off of background. So like this bird flying. Okay, how would we get this bird off of this background? Right there would be very difficult because of the sun and that glare. Okay, but you can find other things too. Smoke on black background. Smoke on a black background is typically how you would film smoke, because it just helps you extract it off of there much easier. So we can grab a piece of this footage. We can grab just anything that you think you might want to do once you kind of understand what we're doing with this. Okay, and then once you have an idea, like let's say I wanted this smoke here. There we go. So if we wanted this smoke here, what we would do is we would copy the URL. We would go to keepvid.com, and then we would just paste it. Now don't click this download or this play. These are advertisements right here. You want to click this download. Then it'll go through and say, you know, a Java thing may pop up here. You may get a banner across the top. You may have to use Internet Explorer. There's kind of some hoops you have to jump through when you use this thing. But essentially you'll get to this, which is here are all the different resolutions of that video. Okay, so we could just download the MP4, the 720p. That's the biggest one. So that's the one we'd want to grab, and we just click it and download it, and then we could utilize that. Okay, now just because we download it doesn't mean it's free. You can't do this professionally, but you can use it for, you know, learning how to key and how to pull stuff off of backgrounds and so on. Okay, so I've created a little folder in my 2560 source keying references. Okay, so what I did was I started off with this Sarcona. Here's my D drive, Sean Sarcona, W14 folder, 2560. I have my source, I have my work. And under source, I have all of the different things that I'm going through, all the different projects that we're going to be doing. Okay, and then here's my keying reference. Here's where I've copied all of these different things that I want to use. Okay, now Nuke can accept some video files right into it, but it typically has a difficult time rendering it out. Okay, so we never want to bring an actual like QuickTime into Nuke. We want to take it through After Effects and then export it as a sequence, and then bring that sequence into Nuke. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into After Effects. I'm just going to double click here, and I'm just going to bring in all of this stuff. For some reason it doesn't like this one, which is an OGB file. Okay, and I'm also going to bring in Cynthia, just so you can see. Now Cynthia I actually don't have to do anything to. I don't believe. Let me make sure. Okay, so here's all my individual pieces of footage. So I'm just going to double click this so you can see. Here is a feather, and it's just the white feather on a black background. Here is, this was kind of a neat piece of footage I found. It's basically people on green screens working out like this. And then their green screens are removed and their mats are there, and then it looks like, hey, they're in an actual workout facility. And they have several pieces of footage throughout this that are doing the same process. Okay. And obviously this one is kind of like off screen. Alright, so that's that one. This is just kind of like a smoke. I could pull the smoke off of the background here. Here's one of those fake green screens that I was talking about. But we can still utilize this technique, because sometimes you may have a piece of footage like this where you just want to pull that off. Here's an explosion. Okay. Here is, this is one of the cool things I found, the Mighty Morphin Animators green screen reference footage. This is about 7,000 frames of them doing a bunch of different green screen work. So different walking passes. Different directions of walking. different falling things. So there's a lot of different pieces of footage here that you might be able to kind of piece something together that could work. Okay, here's kind of a grungy background, kind of neat. Here's Cynthia. And one thing about Cynthia, and a lot of the footage that we're going to get from that site, is it's like stretched out. You can see that she looks really like, I'm sure she looks like a skinny girl already, but she just seems like extra stretched out. Okay, I'm just going to go back. And these all say 530 by 980, but you'll see that up here it says they need to be stretched out to 795 to 980. Okay, so we'll just have to stretch her out and re-export her. And here's another piece of footage of this guy kind of, I don't know what he's doing. But obviously you can use that as well. Here's some smoke that I found. Oops. That's me clicking the wrong button. And then here's a little tripod walker thing. And I just kind of grabbed just to test out some stuff. Okay, so let's take one of these pieces of footage here, and I'll just start, like, the leaf, I don't need to do anything with. The Nuke will take that in no problem, just as a JPEG. I don't want to grab that. We'll grab this one here, okay? So this looks like a good smoke picture. I might want to use these smoke clouds for something. So I'm just going to grab this and drag it onto this new comp button. Okay, now the typical workflow, we'll discuss more in class, but it's basically, you know, you don't want to just have this piece of footage and then cut these things out and then there they are. You typically have things edited together in a video, and then you're extracting, saying, okay, here's where the green screen is in this piece of footage. I need to pull that out, take the green screen off, and then bring that back in nice and clean with whatever background it was I was using. Okay, so here is my smoke. I'm just going to do some cropping work on this, just because I don't want to have this extra footage. So I'm just going to shrink my work area here, and then shrink it on the end also. That way I get rid of those fades that were on there. Okay, so I'm going to go to File, Export, add to render queue, go to Lossless, and we have to export these not as a QuickTime movie. There you are. We have to export these out as a sequence. Now you could use a TIFF sequence, you could use an IF sequence, you could use a JPEG sequence, but you're going to ruin your footage if you convert it to JPEG, because JPEG will ruin, it lowers the quality of your stuff. And I'm going to save these as ping. I like to keep things consistent, and seeing how Cynthia is a ping, I'm just going to make those pings as well. And there's no compression that we need to worry about, so we just leave it as no compression. Everything else is good. We hit OK. So then we go to where we're going to save this. And I'm not going to save it into my source folder, okay, because this is stuff I actually want to use. So I'm going to go into my work folder, keying. I made a folder called keying. And then I'm just going to make a new folder and call it what it is. So this is smoke pillar. Okay, now here's a tricky part. And you want to write this down so you remember it. So this is a smoke pillar, that's what I'm calling it. And because this is a sequence coming out of After Effects, we have to label this correctly. So it's going to be a smoke pillar dot, make sure the dot's there, bracket, pound, 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 end bracket, dot ping. Okay? So make sure you have the name of the file you want, a dot, bracket, few pound signs, bracket, dot png. And what this is going to do, it's going to render it out as name.number.extension, just like Maya does. Okay, so we save it and we render it. Alright, so while that's finishing up, it's taking some time obviously because it has to write out, in this case, 3,400 frames. But you'll see that I have a folder now that is containing each one of these things. And this is where our file size can just get crazy because not only do we have a video of this, That's maybe, you know, 50 megabytes or something. But now we have a folder, and this folder is 1.71 gigabytes. All right. So this is where our file size is really going to start playing, wreaking havoc on us. This is the other folder that I have here, this green screen one. That's the footage of all those people running and falling and tripping and jumping and whatever else. So that one's 3 gigs, right? So you want to make sure that you definitely have enough file space for doing all this kind of stuff. So there we go, we're just finishing up. Then I can come back in here and just see, you know, another piece of footage. So here is the birds flying. So I'm going to extract that. So I just drag this down to the new comp button. And I don't think I need to do anything special here. Nope, everything's good there. So again, file, export, add to render queue. I can delete this previous one. Go to lossless. Choose my ping sequence. Hit OK. Go to here. And put it in a new folder. You always want to keep these things in a new folder, because otherwise things are just going to get crazy with how many things you have just kind of piled together. So this is birds flying. And then remember the same thing. We have the dot, bracket, pound signs, bracket, dot, ping. So we save and we render. Now write that down so you remember that you need to have the name dot, bracket, pound, 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 bracket, dot, PNG or whatever file extension. Okay, so this is just going to play through. And while that's working, I'm just going to open up Nuke so we can start playing with some of the stuff. Okay. So if you're working at like a facility and they have, you know, a video that they're shooting, you know, they'll give you a piece of footage, and that'll usually be a sequence, and they'll say, okay, here's what we need done to this sequence. We need the birds in this sequence to fly around. Let's go back here. We have these birds we want to add to our video. Okay, so we need you to add birds to the video. We also want you to take the smoke from, where's my other one? Yeah, the background. Okay. We want you to take the smoke out of this and add that also to it. We also want you to take this guy. We want you to take this guy and just have him just kind of like flying by the screen or something. Okay. Now there's also other footage on YouTube that's people cut off, and you really have to be careful with what you're doing with it before you get too involved in it. So green screen footage. And I did actually type in the word Snoop, green screen footage. And this is one of the clips that, you know, people have used in the past. And you'll see that in this case, he's actually like cut off, like he's, you know, not there for the rest of it. At some point, he kind of pops back in here and he's walking around. But it doesn't really make for a good piece of footage. Also, the camera's moving in some of these. So it doesn't really, you know, it's hard to use this kind of footage because there's so much stuff that's kind of working against you, all right? So just be careful when you're selecting a piece of footage that you do it in a way that's going to make sense to what we're trying to do. All right, so now we're in Nuke. And I'm going to start bringing in those pieces of footage. But because I have all of these pieces of footage, I have the birds, the green, and the smoke. I'm also going to go to my D drive here, desktop, D drive. And in my keying folder, I'm just going to copy over Cynthia. So I have that. And I'm also going to copy over these still images that I have in here also. Okay, the stills I'm not worried about organizing too much. I could make a new folder called stills and drop all my stills inside there just to keep extra organized. Okay. But now because we have all of these, and we're going to be bringing in several things, if something were to happen and we needed to move computers and we had to redirect Nuke to all of these different things, it would kind of be a hassle. And then if we multiplied that by 1,000,000 because there's, you know, that much more footage, it would really be a hassle. So we're going to do just like we have in Maya, which is we're going to set the project inside here. All right, so I'm going to click in No Man's Land down in the node graph, and I'm going to hit S for settings, and this is going to pop up here, my project settings. So I'm going to start at the top. My project name is going to be just keying. Okay, that's just the name of it. That's what I want to call it. My project directory, this is where I'm saving all my stuff. I'm going to click on that little folder there, and I'm going to go and find my D drive, find Sean, find W14, find 2560, find work, and here's my keying folder, and then I'm going to say open. Okay, so this should be set, my last folder should be my keying folder. Alright, so now Nuke will recognize that and say, okay, well now, as long as we know where this folder is, we should be able to find everything else that's inside that folder. Okay, so I want to make sure, just like in Maya, that I don't link to anything outside this folder. That whatever I'm using for keying goes into that folder. Alright, let me scoot down here. We're going to make a sequence that's about 300 frames. Okay, so 1 to 300. You can play with this number. I don't really have a specific time that I want. If you look at this, there's no specific, I need 30 seconds or whatever. So I'm just using this as 300 right now, just as a base. Okay, how many frames per second? Let's leave this at 24. Okay, some of our pieces of footage, if we jump back to After Effects, this guy is 29.97 frames per second. This is 30. This is 24. This is 30. This is 25. Okay, so it's something you have to keep in mind as you're working with these, because you have different pieces of footage and they're all going to move differently. Now Nuke only uses this number as playback speed. It doesn't actually use it for when you render your stuff out. Okay, if we bring in 300 frames, we take out 300 frames. It makes no difference to Nuke. Okay, as long as as long as we're getting it the correct frames that we're bringing in and taking out. Full size format. I'm going to click here. I'm going to make a new full size format. Okay, and this is going to be HD 720, and the resolution is 1280 by 720. Our end product will be 1280 pixels by 720 pixels. Okay, so we just want to make this a new sizing format so that we can just pick it from the list. Now if we don't pick it from the list, I'll show you later where that becomes an issue. Okay, and then the rest of this is good. We can just close this folder. Alright, so now when we go to read, we come over here. We want to read in a piece of footage, so we hit R. See how it jumps right to the keying folder? That's where we want to go. So I'm going to go into my stills, and I'm just going to bring in all these stills. So I can just shift click those. Alright, there's some stills that I have. I'll just set those over there. I'm going to hit R again for read. We'll go to birds flying. I'll bring in the birds. Hit R again for read. Go to green screen. Grab that. R again for read. Here's Cynthia, which we never adjusted. We'll adjust her inside here. Okay. And then R again for read. And smoke pillars, smoke pillars. Okay. Alright, so now we have a bunch of different pieces of footage here. So I'm just going to highlight all of them and hit L. And L just lays them out. I don't know if it's the L stands for, but that's what it does. Okay. And then we can zoom in to see all these different pieces of footage. So these stills that I have here, these are just kind of the feather one we're going to use for keying. But these other ones are just background ones that I may use. So remember, I can click on any one of these and hit 1, and it'll show me what that piece of footage looks like. Okay. So I'm just going to give us an idea of, if we have this character, we want them to be in this scene, we have to color correct for that scene. If we want them in this scene, we have to color correct for that scene, and so on. Okay. So here's our feather. Here is our birds flying. Okay, and you'll see here that as I'm clicking and dragging in the timeline, that it's actually going to like 6,000 frames to 8,000 frames. So if I look over here on the left, it says global. And that's where the time slider is set to, because it's basically looking at all the pieces of footage and saying, okay, well, what's the longest piece of footage? 8,000? Well, we'll just set this whole thing to 8,000. What I want to do is set this to be... Oops. Alright. I hit S on here to go back to my settings. I forgot to click this lock range button. So I'm going to go back and type 300 and say lock range. There we go. So I'm back to my settings by hitting S, 0 to 300, lock range, and then I can close my properties. Okay, so I'm clicking and dragging here, and at some point, the birds just kind of stop, okay? Because my thing here is set to global, it'll play just until then. Now I could set this to input, and what that's going to do is play just however long that piece of footage is. So this piece of footage is 250 frames. It's going to show me 250 frames. Okay. If I go to this piece of footage, its input is 8,000. And that's where I was getting that 8,000 number from. Okay. Now we don't want to work with this entire 8,000 piece of footage. What we want to do is find a clip in here that we want to use. Okay. And then here's Cynthia, which will adjust her sizing. And again, she's only 200 frames. And here's our smoke pillars, and that's about 4,000 frames. Okay, so we're going to start off very simply with this feather. Okay, and actually I have some smoke I'm going to bring in too. All right, so while that's exporting out of After Effects, I'm just going to save my scene as. Surprised it didn't go back to my folder, but whatever. I'll go back to home, go back to desktop, D drive, SON, W, work, keying, and then in here in my keying folder, I'm going to name this keying setup. And then _01. Okay. Now remember, Nuke will do an autosave for you, but you know what? You don't want to always rely on being able to do the autosave. So as you do your save, you can go to Save As and give it, 02. You could also do File, Save New Version. And what this means is that, see how it says it's no _V $ found? Alright, so let me go back to Save As. I'm just going to put V $V at the end of this. Okay. So now when I go to Save New Version, that should have worked. Okay. So save as V, don't put the pound sign, just put 01. Okay, so V01. That's right. And so next time I can just go to File, Save New Version, and it'll save it as V02. And then Save New Version, V03. So it's a pretty handy way to increment your saving as you're going. Okay, so I'm going to read in my smoke that I just exported as well. And this is the first one I want to do, that smoke one. Just set the feather aside. Okay, so I'm looking at the smoke, and the first thing I want to do is zero myself out. Okay, if we look at the smoke pillar here, you'll see how in this one we're starting at frame 11, and I go back to this one, we're starting at frame 0. Okay, so I just want to make sure that I'm starting at frame 0 or frame 1, typically it's 0, and go from there. Okay, now it's kind of weird inside Nuke because frame 0 is there. After Effects has that too, but like in Maya, the first frame is 1. Okay, so you just be aware of the frame start point in a lot of these, because sometimes that can kind of screw you up. All right, so this is 0 here, so that's fine. This is 603, that's fine too. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to pull this off of this background and I want to apply it to something else. Okay, so I'm just going to use one of these images like this to use as my background. All right, actually, yeah, that won't work. Okay, so I'm just going to put these two guys, near each other, so it just makes a little bit more sense of why they're together. All right, so now to pull this off of here, I need to use a keyer. This little eyedropper here is where all the keyers are located. Okay, now there's a difference keyer, there's a hue keyer, IBK Gizmo, IBK Color, a keyer, Primat, Keylight, and Ultimat. All right. So they all do a different kind of thing, and they all have their pluses and minuses. We're going to kind of hit on a few key points of all of them, and then go from there. Okay. So for this specific piece of footage, I'm going to use a keyer. Okay. And this keyer is basically what kind of keyer is right here. So right now it could be a red keyer, where it'll key out the reds, key out the greens, key out the blues, use a red screen, a green screen, a blue screen, luminance key, saturation key, max key, or min key. Okay, and those all do, like I said, different things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my original footage and hit 1. And then if I come up here and I hit A, you'll see that it's black. Okay, meaning that there's no alpha channel. Remember, A is how I can toggle the alpha channel on and off. Okay, and I can look up here to see it says RGB. I hit A, it switches to A. Okay, so I'm just going to keep an eye on this as I'm going. Make sure I'm working in RGB, but kind of popping in to see what that's going to look like. All right, so I'm going to go down to my luminance key and hit 1. Then come up here and hit A. And you'll see that my A and RGB are now exactly the same. So what this luminance key is doing is it's reading the brightness values and it's setting that as its alpha channel. It's setting that as its transparency. Okay. Let me give you an idea of what this entails. So I take this piece of footage, I put a merge on it right here, M for merge, and I connect the merge 1 to this. And then I view the merge 1, so I hit 1. And I'm getting, one weird thing, which is this big streaky pattern right here. And then the other thing I'm getting is my input now is kind of locked from 0 or to 1 to 1. All right, so I'm going to set this back to global. And now as I hit play, okay, I can kind of see, way down here at the bottom, there's that smoke that we had. And it does look like it's on top of it, which is good. Okay. And we are getting, like I said, the streaky pattern. All right. Now, the reason we're getting the streaky pattern, if I click on this one and hit 1, its piece of footage is 1280 by 720. That's how big this piece of footage is. If I click on this one and hit 1, this piece of footage is 3872 by 2592. So, obviously, this one is a lot bigger than that one. So, when we put these two pieces of footage together, they don't line up perfectly together, so then we get this, okay? And what it's doing is it's repeating those edge pixels. That's all it's doing. That's why we're getting that pattern. So if I wanted to scale this up, I can click on it and hit T. Okay, T is for transform tool, and it's actually right here, transform tool, okay? Or remember, I could also hit Tab, and then type in transform tool. Now there's a transform geo, transform mast. We just want transform. Okay. So now when I do this, what's happening is it's doing what's basically it's taking whatever alpha channel is here and applying it into this. Okay. So it's giving it an alpha channel. So then what I can do is scale this up. So I'm just going to say, okay, let's scale this up to 3. And then I can just move this thing in here. All right, maybe we need to scale it up a little bit more, maybe 4. Okay. So right here, it wasn't using an alpha channel, and when we merged it, it was kind of like faking it, like saying, okay, well, we'll just use the luminance automatically as an alpha channel. But the second we put that transform in, it ignores that and creates its own alpha channel. If we zoom in here, we have red, green, blue, no alpha. When we put the transform on, we have red, green, blue, white. There's the alpha. Okay. So we just have to be aware of that fact right there. Now I could get rid of the alpha. I could actually go in here and say channel, oops, there it is, remove. That's what I wanted. Remove, and then I could pick what channel. Right now it's set to all. I could just say remove the alpha. And now we're back to where we were, okay? But realistically, this has no controls over it. I have no control over how much alpha I'm pulling out. I want to have a little bit more control over this, okay? I can go to the merge, and I could play with, from the brightness, the brightest that it is, and pull it down some. I could also go in here and add a grade, and I can start multiplying this and getting a larger effect. Okay? So there's other ways of doing it without even really using a key yet. So right now this key is here. It's not going anywhere. All right? So nothing's even like connected into this. So now let's kind of remove this stuff. Let's get rid of the grade. Let's get rid of the other thing. And I'm just going to Control X to cut that off of there. Click on the transform. Control V to paste it in. Okay? So now we're essentially back to where we were, but we have more control over this. Okay? So I double click it, and then under this luminance key, I can pull this A. It's a little bit hard to grab just right at that line. I'm pulling that A, and what that does is it adjusts my luminance values. Okay, I'm not really getting a whole lot that way. Let me go this way. There we go. And you can see how I'm kind of pulling in some of this stuff. So I'm adjusting it both ways. And you can see how it might be a little bit subtle. Let me close these windows here, just reopen Luminance. You can see how I'm pulling in and getting rid of some of that stuff. Now I still might need a luminance on this. It is still pretty dim, or not a luminance, but a grade. So I can always go before this and just add a grade. Oops. Click on the transform and hit G to add the grade. And do that multiply. And that'll brighten up those darker spots too. Okay, and then again, we can still come back and we can still play with a lot of these things just to kind of get this under wraps of where we want it. Okay, there's also a C and a D here. I typically don't really need to use those. Usually it's just the A and B seem to be sufficient. Okay, so now we rewind and we hit play. You typically, anytime you do any kind of keying, you want to go back and make sure that the key is working throughout. Okay, because sometimes you'll do it on frame 100 and it looks great on frame 100, but then you go back to frame 5 and on 5 it looks horrible. Alright, but it looks like overall this is working pretty good. Okay, so I'll just leave it like that, and there is a luminance key. Okay, so that's the way we can pull this off, is reading basically the bright values of this, and using these we're kind of clamping in where we want that to happen. Okay, so now I can apply the same kind of thing to my feather. So let's bring the feather over here. And for some reason there's a feather kind of floating in the background. Alright, so the first things first, let's go through and look at this piece of footage. Alright, so I hit 1 on the piece of footage. You'll see that there's a bit of dirt inside here. It's not, let me boost this up a bit so you can see, it's not a perfectly clean image. Alright, there's a lot of noise that's inside here, and if you look really close, you can see how the pixels are basically like these little blocks. Because this is a JPEG, this is what JPEGs do, is they kind of compress it and kind of ruin some of the stuff that's in here. Okay, so we just have to be aware of those kinds of things as we progress. Alright, now in this case, I'm just going to zoom out a little bit. Oops. I'm going to take this feather and I'm going to add a keyer to it. Alright, now I want to see what the alpha channel looks like, so I hit A. And there's the alpha. It looks like it's doing a pretty good job. But now let's see what it's going to look like on a background. Now I don't want to use it on this background. You typically don't want to always look at it on the exact plate. Sometimes you want to look at it just on a clean background. So I'm just going to create a clean background to kind of merge this on top of. Oops. There we go. So I'm just going to go to merge. Okay, so I'm merging it like we did before. Now I just want to put it on top of something. So I'm just going to click off into no man's land and add a constant. Okay, and a constant in Nuke is like a solid in After Effects. So I click on the color. I'm just going to pull this up to about halfway, maybe a little bit darker. And then I just merge this in. There we go. Okay. So now here's what it looks like. Now you'll notice again, the feather is 1,000 pixels by 1,300 pixels. So it's really, really tall. My constant is only 720 pixels tall. So we put them together, we get this. So again, I'll come back here. I'll hit T for transform. And I'll scale it down. Now I can scale it using the manipulator out here. If you look at this thing, right now it's in the move. As I bring it out here, it turns into like an X. That's the scale. Okay, so I'm just moving it and scaling it so I can see it on my screen. Okay, so now that doesn't look terribly bad, but what I want to do too is I want to boost this up a little bit and play with these because I can still see there's kind of an edge here. You might not be able to see it on the recording, but I can definitely see there's an edge there. So if I come back and I hit A on this merge, it's showing me the alpha, and there's definitely an edge right there. Let me boost that right there. Okay, so I'm still getting an edge on this thing, even though it's not there, or even though we're not seeing it too much. So I'm going to go back to my luminance keyer and just play with these until I get that edge to go away. Okay. Now it looks like the edge is gone now. I can also verify that by using my mouse. If I watch this number here, that's my alpha. There's no alpha channel stuff out here. It's only when I get in here that I start to pick up some of that alpha. Okay. So I hit A again. And now we're having this kind of plop right on top of that. Okay, now there is still some color difference, so it is still picking something up in there. So let me again just kind of pull this. Maybe a little extreme about some of these. Okay, so it's still picking up something. If I look at these color values here, you'll see how they're kind of changing. They shouldn't. This should be all solid because there's no alpha. And then when I get here, it should be that 0.11. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in a pre-multiply. So right here, I'm going to say pre-mult. Okay. And what the pre-mult does is it actually applies the alpha. Okay. In this case, we really didn't need the pre-multiply because it all automatically kind of blended together the way we needed it to blend. Here, it's not doing that. All right. So we put this luminance keyer on there. We use the pre-multiply. And now as I move my mouse over, you see that I get the 0.11 values throughout until I get to the feather, and then I start getting other values. Okay, now obviously I've gone a little bit too far with these settings, so we can just play with it. So I'm pulling this back here, I'm pulling this back here, and I may need to go up to this and just add a grade in. Okay. Now this does look a little bit harsh. You can tell definitely, okay, this is like crazy, a lot of stuff going on right here, and I've kind of like washed out the entire feather. But sometimes what we do is we do this. Okay, I have this whole thing, and this is basically setting up my key, and then I can recopy the key in there. Okay, so this is again one of the cool things about Nuke is that I can say, okay, well, I have this piece of footage, I want it in this spot. I don't want the grade on the final one, but I need the grade for the keying to work. Okay, so I could just go in here and add another grade, and this isn't the way we're going to do it, but I could pull this back down to like -4. Yeah, -4. Yeah, I'd have to figure out the math in getting all these. That's why I typically don't do it like that. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, well, here's the grade, here's the key. Let's get this over on this side. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this information. So I'm going to click on here and hit K for copy. And basically what this is going to do is I'm going to copy the alpha channel into this. Okay, now it might look confusing, but we'll take a second after I get it all set up to look at it and see what it's doing. Okay, so we have the piece of footage, we've moved the piece of footage. And then we branch off. Here we've done a grade on it, and then we've created a key, and then we've copied that key, that alpha channel, into here, and then we've pre-multiplied it and applied it to this. Okay. So we can go back to this gray keyer. We can play with these settings again. There we go. And tweak it until we're getting the results that we want. You can see from that, it looks like it's a pretty convincing leaf or a feather on here. Okay, maybe it's a little bit too strong on the edges. Oops, wrong one. So we can pull these edges down slightly. And now we just kind of soften those edges ever so slightly there. Perfect. Okay. And this is a common thing to do inside of Nuke, where we start building these branches of, you know, here's where the alpha channel gets created, and then we're copying it back into the stack. We could also add what's called an erode. Okay. So this erode would shrink or grow out that thing. All right. I could also, let me delete that one. If I go to erode again, you see there's a fast, filter, and blur. I could add a blur one. That way I can still kind of pull it in, but then I can also blur it and kind of soften some of those edges a bit. All right, so if I see that's a little bit too harsh, I can play with those settings. And then remember, I can use D as my toggle to turn things on and off. Okay. So I don't really need that. I think it's good the way it is. So that's good there. Okay. So obviously we have a little bit different setup. Here, we're basically doing a luminance key. And then over here, we're still doing the luminance key right there. But what we're doing is generating the alpha here and then copying it back in. Okay. So pay attention to, as you're doing this type of stuff, where these node graphs are kind of flowing. So from here, it's going into the transform. And then transform is just breaking off. One's going here to the grade, then to the luminance here, and then copying it in the A channel. And then under transform, it's going into the B channel here. Basically, it means that A is being copied into B. And then here's the result pre-multiplied and then merged over our constant. Okay. Now if I want to see what it's going to look like over here, well, all I have to do is drag this little A onto the pre-mult, click on the merge, hit 1, and now I can see what it's going to look like. And I could also come back to that transform because now it's a different size, obviously, and I could scale this up. And if I move it by this bar somewhere, nope, that's skewing it. Oh, there we go. Just go further out, and I could rotate it and drop it in. Okay. Now I am getting a bit of transparency right in the center here, which obviously on the original, it was just so dark there that it just kind of like pulled it away. All right. So I could go back and try to play with this and see if I can get it. So I'm looking at right now my luminance key here. Let me disable that transform so it's back to where it was. And you'll see that on here, it's gone. It's washed away. So I could play in the keyer, trying to pull that area up. Oops, let me go to the alpha channel. And you can see it's kind of doing it. It's not really getting where we need it to do it. Right about there, we're a little bit closer. And then we start introducing some of that noise back in here, right? So we're going to go through other methods of kind of cleaning up this kind of stuff once we get further into this whole thing, okay? Let's undisable that, undisable this. Look at the merge over here. Okay. I'm just taking a bit to calculate right now for some reason. All right, and again, the edges are kind of like messy now because we just kind of screwed it up. Okay, so one thing we're gonna see that sometimes we need to generate separate alpha channels. Sometimes we have one for the outside or the finer detail, and one for the inner parts, the core. Okay, so this gives you just a basic idea about some of this stuff. All right, now let's jump to the birds. So here are the birds. All right, now what we want to do on these birds is we want to pull them off of their background. So in this case, I could use a green screen keyer, and it'd probably work. But I'm going to show a difference keyer, okay? So I'm going to say difference. Let me see what my computer is doing because it just seems to be taking forever to do anything. Alright, I closed After Effects, so that might have been what was doing it. Alright, so here is the difference keyer, and you'll see that it has two sets of inputs here. Okay, it has an A and a B. There's the difference keyer. And what this is going to do is it's going to take a piece of footage. Okay, so let's use, let me close this. Let's use this green screen as an example. So it's going to say here's the green screen, and then it's going to try to find differences in the picture here. So when we get to something like this, it's going to say, okay, well, these are different pixels, these are different pixels, these are different pixels. So this is the stuff we want to pull out. Okay, so that's what it's going to do. So what I need to do is get a image that is exactly this green. Now if I move my mouse over anywhere on the image, I can see the color value right here is 0.69. Come on. 0.69387. I did that with Control Shift, just marking it, and then I can see what that value is because it's locked in. And then I hold Control and click, and it goes away. Okay, so I could create a constant, just connect it to the B, and then use the eyedropper, Control Shift click, and that'll lock in that value. Okay, so I look at the result, and as I move further up, you'll see that nothing is there, but as I hit A, I can see the alpha channel of the birds. Alright, now that's not an issue with you know, having to do now the keying of this thing. What it's an issue with is this thing here. It should be opposite. These two things should be swapped. Okay, so I could disconnect A, disconnect B, reconnect them, whatever, or I can just click on difference and hit Shift X. And what Shift X does is it inverts these two connections. So you now see B is here and A is there. Just swap these so it looks nicer. Alright, so we have a difference key. Here's our still image, and then here is what it's comparing, or is what's being compared. And then whatever is different, if I hit A up here now, you'll see we get an alpha channel of that. Alright, so now if I come in here and I say, okay, well now I have these things pulled off, let me put it onto a background. So I'm going to add this time a checkerboard. And I'm just going to merge this in. So here's my A, here's my B. I hit 1 so I can see it. You'll see that the birds are coming out like semi-transparent. If I go to my alpha for this, you'll see in here that they are. You can see it's 0.0516, 0.44282. And the reason for that is there's still a bit of green in there. Alright, it's not a full amount of green. So that's why we're getting that value here. Okay, so there is some kind of shading that would go into this. If this was totally a separate color, like it went from this green here to like bright black, then there would be a difference of the alpha channel would be much stronger. So I can go into here and say grade, because I want to adjust the coloring on it. I want to adjust the strength of it. And I can say, okay, I want to grade the alpha channel. And basically what I'm doing is not lifting. I'm multiplying the alpha channel to kind of brighten it up. And you can see that that's definitely a lot brighter now. Alright, so then when we go back to this merge, we're getting a lot stronger results. Now you'll also notice here that these checkerboards are now colored green. I believe they were colored green even before I did that. Yes, they were. Okay, so what's happening is just like before when we did this, the feather, that it needs that pre-multiply in here. And basically what the pre-multiply is doing is it's applying the alpha channel. Okay, we've generated one here, but we haven't actually applied it. Alright, so I'm going to say pre-mult, and then you'll see that the birds are now cut out of the background. Now they are green a bit, but if you remember from our source footage, they were green still. As I hover my mouse over this, you'll see that there's no black in them at all. Come on. Yeah, it's 0.0292, 0.00104 for blue. Okay, so there's definitely a green tint to it. So it's not going to color correct them. Okay, we can do that with our grade. Oops. What have I done? There we go. No idea what I did. Alright, so I can go back to my grade, And what I can do is, here's the alpha channel that I played with, and that's the settings that I did to it. If I change this to anything else like RGB, it's going to apply those changes to that. Okay, so what I can do is go to my gain here, and I could pull this green back. Oops, let me go back to RGBA, and I'm pulling the green back. Okay, basically it's pulling all the green out of it, getting rid of all the green, so that allows me to have more black, and there's probably a touch of blue in there too. Okay, so in order for me to get rid of the green, I went to gain, I pulled the green off of it, and there it goes, it's gone. So now we have these black birds, I hit play, flying around. Now obviously they don't look like full-blown resolution birds flying around, but they're not really supposed to. They're just kind of like a shadowy type thing of birds, like we had birds flying in the sky or something like that. Okay, now we can't add something to what's not there. Here's the source footage. That's what we have in the source footage. So like I said, there's nothing we can do to add to that except kind of fake some of the stuff that we're doing. Alright, so there's how we did the birds using a difference key. Okay, now all of these are important because you never know when you're going to need these. So sometimes you need this setup, sometimes you need this setup, sometimes you need this setup here. Okay, sometimes you'll need some other kind of setup that we're going to do. Alright, so you just have to be aware of all these kinds of things as we're going. Alright, so now let's go down to our piece of footage here. Come on. Alright, so now here's our smoke stack, and I want to extract the smoke from this stack here. Okay, so what I could do, and this is a common thing, is if I was using a difference key here, remember we would need to have a clean background for this. Okay, so if I want to pull these clouds off of this, or the smoke off of this background, I would have to have a clean plate. So sometimes I actually go and take the still image into Photoshop and then clean the clouds up so it looks like the rest of the sky, and then it'll pull that off of there because it's obviously different. It's not the same thing on this frame than it is on the reference. All right, but in this case I'm going to try to use a luminance keyer to pull that off. Okay, but I'm going to have to kind of crop it because obviously a luminance keyer is not going to pull everything. But we'll just see what we get. All right, so I'm going to add a keyer. And again, we swap back to the alpha using A. Okay, so I'm going to work an A with the alpha channel up this time as I pull this in. And you can see that as I pull this in, it's basically cutting off a lot of these buildings. I'm going to pull the white up a bit so I don't want to lose the sky. Pull that down, pull this up. Okay, so you can see basically there's not like a end-all solution for something like this. I'm basically, if I zoom in on this, these areas here which are a bit lighter are actually pulling off as part of the key. Okay, and this building here, which is a little bit lighter on the one side, is actually getting cut off than that one. So, like I said, you're never going to find like a one solution for everything. So because I'm just trying to get the smoke, I'm going to focus on just getting the smoke to work. Okay, and essentially all that means is pulling the smoke off of the background. Maybe. Okay, so I'm just comparing now to see where I'm at and where I was. Okay, so I have this, and what I want to do is I want to use that. Okay, so I'm going to say, okay, well here is my first key. There it is. If I were to pre-multiply it right here, it'll give me that, which is obviously not exactly what I want. But what I can do is, let me delete the pre-mult, is I can add in what's called a roto. We've used this before. Okay, so it's basically here's where we are at with this. And I can take my roto, and I'm just clicking around this. Okay, I'm just outlining a path of where I want this smoke to be extracted. Okay, basically, like, here's where I want you to focus your efforts on. Oops. Okay, now in this case, you'll see, okay, as I go to alpha, it's like, okay, well, the whole thing is white. All right, now why is the whole thing white? It's because right now we're basically using this as an alpha channel. Then the second we added the roto replaces any alpha channel that's there. So what I have to do is come over to this arrow and say, okay, I want you to use a mask. I want you to use the alpha channel from the previous one and use this one as an alpha channel. Okay, so we're creating an alpha and using this as a mask. It still should be cutting it out. Now this is one of the limitations of using the luminance keyer, because it just doesn't have a lot of options here. And then even the roto, we're kind of doing this like backwards with the roto. Okay, so I'm just going to delete the luminance and the roto. And looking at this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use one of our other keyers that's over here. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is add that roto shape. Okay, and the roto is just going to be outlining this is where we want this to happen. Okay, we wanted to focus on this. So when I switch back to my alpha, you can see how it's focusing just on that area. Okay, so now I can go over here to one of my other keyers, and I wonder... No, we'll try something else. I'm going to try a hue keyer. And this one, it has the same limitations as the other one. But what I can do is I'm going to go into my amount here, where it says amount. And as I hover my mouse over the blue, I can see where it's picking up over here. Okay, so that's the color range that it's getting. So that's what I'm going to kind of limit this to. So I'm going to take this and pull it down. I'm just holding shift to constrain it. I'm going to pull this over a bit and then pull it down. It's not down, pull it up. And then I'm just going to pull these in closer together. Okay, now it's not going to be that's not going to be the one we're going to use, but just so you can see what it's going to do. And that this is actually going to key the blue based on its color. Okay, so it's kind of like a green screen, but it's using whatever color we've chosen. Okay, so here we've kind of isolated the smoke. It's not pretty, terribly pretty right now, but what we can do, let me go to the saturation amount. Let's see, we're about the same spot here, so let's go scoot that over, scoot this over. Come on. And a lot of these are just kind of like play with it, you know, just kind of look at what the alpha channel is doing here. Okay. So basically we've kind of got that key isolated. So like I said, we're not going to use a hue keyer for this. I just want to kind of show that quickly. So we have Ultimatte, we have Key Light, we have Primatte. These are kind of like the big three. I'm going to use Ultimatte first, and we'll just see what Ultimatte gives us. Okay. So right now Ultimatte is not really doing anything. I'm going to pick a screen color, because right now it doesn't know what the screen color is. So I'm going to click on this swatch, hold down Control Shift, and click on the blue. And you can see how it pulled that blue off, but it's still reading the rest of this image. Okay, so I'm going to tell it that I don't want to read the rest of the image. In here, there's a bunch of different things going on. There's this GM, there's this BG, there's this CP, and then here's the FG. Okay, FG is foreground, BG is background, CP I forget, and then GM is garbage mask. That's the one we want to use. Okay, so garbage mask, we're going to just add a dot node in. So I'm just going to add a dot node over here. Click the garbage mask to the dot node, and this arrow to the roto. Okay, and what it did, you see, whoops, my thing is totally gone now. So I want to invert it. So I'm just going to jump back to my roto, click this little invert button, and now you see that I've isolated just the smoke. So as we're looking at this, we're looking at just the smoke being isolated. Okay, so let's jump back to Ultimatte, because we have to kind of clean it up a little bit. Right? So we picked a color which was this blue, and it just goes through and it pulls that blue out of there. Then we can come back in here and go to density, and I use it in the alpha channel. Okay, typically you want to go to the alpha and play with things there. And I want to pull this up or pull it down and try to get the smoke to look the way I want the smoke to look. Okay, I'm not looking at the color of this, I'm more looking at the shape of it. Okay, you can see down here I'm getting these like weird lines because my shape is just not where it needs to be. Okay, let's go this way a little bit. That way, good. Alright, so there it looks like we have some smoke. Looks like it's pretty nice. We can go to screen correct and we can adjust the screen a little bit. You can see how it's just kind of pushing it out further. I can change these kinds of things. You don't typically need to change those kinds of things. Shadow, spill, cleanup, we'll get into what those mean later. Alright, so that's good. Alright, so now what we can do is we have this. We can go to a... there's another one called color bars. So I'm just going to merge this on top of color bars. And if I go back to Ultimatte, and here I could say the output mode is not just the composite, but it's the pre-multiplied. So I can say pre-multiply this. There it goes. And this should be the pre-multiplied version. Okay. Or I can say unpre-multiplied, and then I can pre-multiply it. And then there's the pre-multiplied version. Okay. So either way works. Some people like to do the pre-multiply inside here. That way they can see that it's being pre-multiplied. Other people don't. I could also, instead of me adding this merge in here, I could just go to where this says background and drop the background in. Okay, and then change this to composite, and then I can see what it looks like. Now the downside of this is that I can't control how it's being composited. It's just kind of like, there it is. It's on top of it. Okay. Where if I use the merge, let's go with this A, let's go with this B, change this to pre-mult. Okay, then I can go into the merge and I can control the level of mix that's on here. I can control the operation, so it's a plus, or it's a screen, or it's a whatever. Okay, and I can also do operations after the fact of this. Just change it back to over. But I can take this and do a grade on this after, and then just like we did before, let me go to RGBA, because that's what we want to adjust. I can go to multiply and click on the color swatch, and you'll see that I have the red, green, blue, and alpha. So I can individually adjust these. So here I'm pulling the alpha channel up. Okay. And I can adjust the color of each one of these types of things. I could also go in here and add a road blur to blur out some of my smoke. Okay, or adjust the edge after the fact. Or I can go in here and add an actual like blur and blur just the RGB channels. Okay, so I'm just softening the RGB channels, keeping the alpha where it is. Or I can add another erode and just kind of pull it in a little bit, right? So there's lots of different things I can do, and this is the preferred method, is to not do, oops, there we go, is to not do a background here, is to do this stuff afterwards and then merge it in to that background, okay? And then we also want to, you can use this background as kind of like a preview until you get to that end result. But this is the recommended method for doing that. There we go. Okay. And then again, we could always look at this under something else. Let me grab one of my other pictures. Just one of those. I just copied and pasted it. Drop it on here. There's my smoke. I'll make it come off of this little pipe right here. Okay, so I can just go and once I have this as an asset, I can just put in a transform node. And then move it way back there and shrink it down some. But you can see it got cut off on the top here. So when we look at it in our final footage, the top's also cut off right there. Okay. Now let's pretend that I wanted to kind of isolate this to this side even more than I already did. I could always go back to this roto that I have here and just kind of tweak the shape of it. I can just say, okay, well, I want this to be lined up here and there. I really only want this one. I don't need this other one here. Okay. And I could also add a feather on this. So as I feathered this, it's just kind of softening that edge a bit. Okay, and I'm pulling this down just to soften that even more. Now that feather doesn't seem like it's really doing anything. Oh, probably because our grade is kind of kicking it up even further. That's most likely what's happening. Yeah. So we can always go back down to this stuff down here. And just add in just a blur just to that alpha channel. Just to kind of soften it, throw it in the background more. Yeah, I think it probably needs to be translated slightly over and maybe even down a little bit. Okay, and then come back to the roto. And as I'm adjusting these, you'll see over here that I keep setting keyframes for my roto. Alright, so I'm just going to go back and delete the keyframe. Go back and delete the keyframe. That way I can stick on the one frame and adjust it from one spot. Okay, I can also turn the keyframes off. There we go. So now I'm kind of shaping it to look like it's coming out of that item. Okay, so not the world's greatest job in compositing, but you get the idea of what we're trying to do here. Okay, we're just adding this moving element to this little pole just to get it to come out some. And that's just a weird artifact happening on the left side of the screen. Okay. Alright, so that was the Ultimate Keyer. Now we're going to get into actual like green screen stuff. Okay, so let's start with her. And she's obviously on a green screen. And we want to be able to take her off of it. Okay. So I'm going to use Ultimate again first because we're already kind of a little bit familiar with it. And all the buttons are up here too. So we can play with a lot of things up here. We can play with a lot of things inside here as well. And some of these, you know, my screen's not holding anything. I need to stretch it out to see it all. Okay. So what I want to do on here is I'm going to first pick my color key. So you can always go to the screen, hold Control Shift, and click, and it'll pop it off of there. Okay. Now when I hit A, you'll see that it actually did a pretty good job of popping her off of this background. Okay. If we look close though at her hands, there's little bits of gray in here, and those little bits of gray mean transparency. All right. So just for fun, let's drop her onto a constant background color. So I'll pick the color. Let's just say that. Okay. Let's go here to. Oops. We really need to do a merge on this. I'm just going to pop it into that background channel, just so we can preview it. Okay. Because remember, I can do background as long as I'm just previewing it, and then when I do the final, I would actually do like a merge. All right. So now, as I adjust this color, you can see that the color is also adjusting in her hands. Okay. Well, it's not a big deal. You could say, well, that's just kind of like bounced light inside there. Well, what happens if we use an image? Okay. Well, now what's happening is that image is coming through, and if there's a video of a dog walking behind her, well, that video of a dog walking behind her is going to be inside there. All right. So we just need to tighten it up a little bit. All right. So that's where I can come into my Ultimate, and I'm just going to pull this off. I think it'll be easier maybe if I pull my node graph over here and pull my properties, just kind of like floating off to the side, I guess. It's always tricky when you're used to having a lot of screen space. All of a sudden you don't. All right. Okay, so let's get organized. All right, so let's go to density now. I hit A, oops, in here so we can see it. And I can play with the brights. So as I take the brights up, it's taking the white and pushing it out more. Okay, so we're getting some of these areas that we didn't have before. So I can click and hit A again. And what we should have now is you see those little bits of green on our hands. If I go back to 100, we didn't have that. We're actually getting this weird purpley color because it's like mixing half and half. Okay, so 500 seemed to be the magic number there. And she looks like she's pretty much cut out. You can see her legs now, though, are not looking very good. Let's go back to 100 on here. Her legs are great here, but her hands, there's just an issue with it just because of where it's at. So again, I might be able to play with the darks. Most likely not, just because of where it's at. Maybe a little bit. Let's see. Actually, that seemed to work pretty good. Okay, maybe I can adjust the lights a little bit. I don't even know if I need to do that. Okay, I don't play with the edge too much. I'm just playing with it a little bit. If I go to 0, we're getting this like little glow. So I just pull this up a little bit. It just kind of takes that away. Okay, so that's Ultimate, and we can play with this even more, going this way or that way or whatever. You'll see in some of these other pieces of footage how it's not going to be this easy, where it's just kind of click, 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 and then it works. Okay, so here's that piece of footage. Let's just set this Ultimate off to the side here. Okay, I'll just disconnect. I won't disconnect it. I'll just copy this and just paste it here. Okay, so now we have another piece of footage, or that same piece of footage. There it is. And then what we're going to do is we're going to use key light. Okay, so key light has a bunch of stuff. Here is a BG, what we had before, out M, in M, and source. So we'll drop the source on here. And our BG in this case is going to be the constant. We'll preview this. And you'll see that we have a lot of the same things. Here is the screen color. Okay, we don't get the nice little swatch up here. Here's screen color, so we can click on the eyedropper, Control Shift, click, and try to find a good color. Okay. And actually, you want to hit, if you hit Control Shift and you click, you can see how it picked up black. Well, black was the color that's there. So I hit Control Shift again, and I get the green. Okay, there it is. Control Shift, I get that. So I don't want to have to keep clicking. If I hold Control Shift and Alt, it'll always pick from the source footage itself. Okay. So what we're doing with this is we're trying to find the right green that we want to use. Okay. Obviously up here, or I can go way up here. Okay. We're not getting a good range of greens. But down here, we get a really good range of greens where it takes out a whole lot of the stuff. Okay. And again, we'll switch back to the alpha and switch forward. Okay. And again, Control Alt Shift. And we can, again, try to find a nice one that's going to take out most of those values for us. Okay. So even though here it looked fine, it's actually, I think, there seems to be a good spot to go. Because down here, we're just still getting too much white. There you go. So right about there looks good. Okay. Then we can come in here and say screen gain. And you'll see that just by sliding up that screen gain, how I've taken that off. How now it's gone. I can also go to screen balance and just adjust. You can see in our hands especially, oops, how by playing with that, we're kind of pulling our hands back into it. Okay, it's just a delicate thing that we have to continually play with. Nuke is thinking again, and it crashed. Alright, so now here's the real test, is that when I go back into Nuke, and I go to Open, and we find our keying setup version 2 as the latest one, it'll say the autosave file for blah 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 is newer. Do you want to restore? I hit yes. And you can see how it takes me right back to where I had Keylight. So again, I'm just going to save this. One of the great things about Nuke is that it does that kind of stuff. Okay, so I'm back to my old layout. Big deal. I'm just going to keep this. I think it's actually a little bit easier to work with. Than the other one. Okay. So, again, we can go back to Screen Matte. And here's where we can play with this even further. This is kind of like, you start at the top and work your way down. Here's the screen, the clipping the black, where I'm pulling up more of the blacks. So you can see our hands are getting darker. Here I'm clipping the whites, so I'm pulling the whites, making them brighter. Okay, now we do have this little edge thing happening here. So that's where I can use a screen dilate. And I basically just kind of popped it in. -2 pixels, maybe -1 would be sufficient. Or maybe -1.5. There we go. Okay, so that looks pretty good. And again, we've cleaned it up. Now we're looking at the final result up here at the top. We can look at the composite to see what it's going to look like on that background. And again, because this background is a different size than her, we're getting different results. Ultimatte kind of fixed it for us. This one's not fixing it for us. Okay, so in this case, we may have to add a transform node right here and just kind of scale that solid up a little bit. Okay, and then again, we want to play through just to make sure that we're not getting any weird bugs. And also look at the alpha. Oops. Let's go to Keylight and let's go back to the final result and look at the alpha and just make sure that we're not getting any weird blips in here. Like right there, you can see there's a weird blip that just kind of pops through on our hand. Okay, so maybe I need to clip the white a little bit less. And there goes Nuke again. This is going to be a fun assignment. Yes, restore. There we go. Oh, it's already framed. Okay, we could also look at the inside mask, the outside mask, the combined matte, the status. The status is a good one to look at because it gives you this this thing that basically tells you black is no mask, white is a mask, and then these other colors are kind of like where it's not. It's basically a transition. Okay, so in the middle here, there really shouldn't be any transition stuff. So that's where we want to kind of pull this stuff in to get that. And as I bring my mouse over this, I can definitely see there's some values that are inside here. All right. Now here's where we have inside mask right here that we could use. Right now there's no inside mask. It's just nothing. Okay. So what I can do is I'm going to create an inside mask. All right, and that'll help me kind of keep her a little bit nicer on the inside of this. So I'm going to go here and go to yeah, we'll just try a regular keyer and see what happens. Okay, so on this regular keyer, I'm going to go to up there. I'm going to go to Operation Green Screen. Okay, and this will pull off the green screen. There, I go here, pull that up. There we go. Okay, so even a little bit more. There. Okay, we're still losing our hands in this. It's just a tricky balancing act. That's all this is. Okay, and I'm just going to pull this up a little bit more just to make sure that I'm getting it. I am. Okay. All right, so now we basically have her cut out of there. Okay. So let me just set this over here. And if I went to pre-mult, just so you can see it, she would definitely be cut out, but now she has this hideous green color going around her. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this alpha channel and I'm going to erode it. Okay, just a regular erode. And I'm going to say just the alpha and pull it in some. Okay, so what this is doing is kind of like offsetting our path to give us a solid color right in the middle. Okay, so this is going to be our inner mask. Oops, let me click these off. I just want to create it nicely. So this is my inner mask, is this dilate. My source is still my source, which is up here. Okay. So I have this is my green screen alpha. Here's my dilate. Here's my key light. Okay, let's go back to key light. And I'm looking at the inside mask. There's nothing here. So I have to come down to inside mask and tell it that I want to use normal. And I should be using that inside mask. Alright, there it is. I did have to have it connected that way. Alright, so I still want my source and my inner mask to go to this dilate. You'll get accustomed to all these different kind of nuances with each individual node where, you know, you kind of have to play around with it to get the result you're after, right? So there's the inside mask. And I could ignore it. I could add it to the mask. I could just do normal, which is obviously gone. So I'm just going to go to inside mask, and what this is going to do is when I go to my final result and I look at this mask, I don't have to worry now about that inside where the hands were. Oh, I'm looking at the alpha channel. It shouldn't be. All right. So I don't have to worry about that inside area now because that inside mask is kind of covering it up. So it's basically doing what we did over here with the smoke where we had the roto. So I'm creating this inside mask as basically like a roto shape and then adding it to it. So when I'm over here and I'm doing this green screen and then I do a dilate and then I add the key light, it's all just kind of compiling that and creating several masks that kind of layer on top of each other to create the final look of it. Okay. And then again, we can look at the composite and verify that yes, we do have a nice looking composite, and then play through. Now I also recommend that we go and look at this. So I'm going to click on this one and hit 2. Go to the end result and hit 1. And I like to go back and forth and say 1, 2, 1, 2. Oops. And just make sure we don't lose anything. You'll see we're losing a little bit of our legs here. They're kind of like thinning out just a bit too much. Okay. So that's where we might want to come into key light and say maybe we're dilating this a little bit too much. So -1 here instead of 1.5. And now we're a lot closer than we were. Okay, we could also take the softness up a little bit. Maybe not that much. Okay, now we'll notice here where it says, oh, I forgot that's why I should have put that there. There we go. Whatever. That works too. That's why my inner mask wasn't working connected up the other way, because I didn't scroll down far enough to choose alpha from my list. And otherwise it would have worked without me having to connect it. Whatever. So our spill, despill, here you go, screen replace. We can replace this with the source. Okay, so what this is doing is if it found that there was some green kind of bouncing in, it's replacing it with the source, which is kind of this green color. I can also do a hard color, which is obviously that, and a soft color, which kind of softens and blends it in. So typically we leave this as soft color unless we have a specific reason for doing the other ones. Okay. And then there's also some tuning stuff that's inside here as well. Now, I'm kind of skimping through a lot of these settings. There's actually on here, there is a key light tutorial. Stephen Wright. There's a keying tutorial with Stephen Wright. He's using Ultimat. Okay, and Stephen Wright's one of the premier people for using Nuke and for using a lot of this stuff. And he has this is a 2-part thing where he uses Ultimat. And he literally goes through every single one of the steps. There's also a lot of stuff. Here's the Foundry where they go through and show key light. Here's part 1 of key light, and this is a 10-minute video. So on any one of these, you can get more information. If you're using key light, you're having trouble, jump to YouTube and get the info. Because a lot of these are the same. And this key light is actually in After Effects as well. So a lot of these things we're seeing here apply in After Effects. Okay. So now let's go to a little bit different, harder piece. Let me save. Where is that other piece? There it is. Okay. So in this piece, we're dealing with a lot of different pieces of footage kind of wrapped together. So let me set this back to input so that we can see all the different kinds of pieces. Now I want to cut out one of these walk cycles. Okay. Now if I cut the green screen out of one, it doesn't mean it's going to cut out for all of them. Because if you look here, we're different lighting, different angles. Here, same thing. Here, same thing. Okay. So you really have to kind of do this on a shot-by-shot basis. There may be some carryover from like this one here to this one here. Obviously, we're looking at two very similar things. Okay, so let's go back to this. There we go. And let's try to find just a clip. So I'm just going to use my arrow keys and try to find where the start of this clip is. Yeah, that looks like kind of like a goofy walk. Let me go back to this one. There we go. So this starts at 676. 676 to 783. 676, 783. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in here. There's a time thing right there. And there's a bunch of different time things that I can adjust. Oops. Not that. I'm going to use, it's like a two-step thing here. One's going to be frame range. And this is going to be 676, 783. Okay, so this just isolates me to have that exact frame range. Okay, basically like the work area inside of After Effects, right? But I don't want to start off at frame 676. That's like, you know what, that's a weird spot to start. So then I'm going to do a time offset. Okay, and this is in frames, how many frames I want to offset it. So I'm going to put negative 676. So now you'll see that I've isolated this, and I'm only dealing with 107 frames now. So frame 0 to 107 is right here, nice and neat. Okay. So I did the frame range just to tell it, here's the frames that I want off of this clip. Then I did the offset to make it go backwards. Okay. Now, just a fun little tip, if we're using this for multiple things, I don't want to have to keep punching these values in, is that I can actually use this value here and make it negative. Okay, so if I hold the control key and I left click and drag this down here, you see how it automatically pops these two in there, right? But now if I right click and I go to expression, edit expression here, I could say, basically what this is doing is it's saying parent.framerange1.knob.firstframe is where it's getting its value. So I'm just going to multiply -1 by it. And so now whenever I change this, let's say I wanted this to be 500, it'll automatically change that one to -500. Okay, it's not a huge time saver, but it saves you, an extra minute or 30 seconds. Okay. So now we have this walk cycle here. And so now we want to go through and key. So we're going to use a different keyer. One thing that you'll see in here, we have a blue fan. We have some lights hanging from there. These are not going to be keyed out. Okay, there's no way for us to pull a key off this green screen and remove these things automatically. So what we want to do is we want to isolate our character and use our character as what we want to be able to key out. Okay. So what I'm going to do is just do a little roto shape here. So I'm going to do a roto. And I'm just going to draw a very, very rough shape around the person. I'm actually going to go probably pretty big here. Just because when I take big strides, it's a lot easier just to kind of isolate that. Okay. Now this is blue right at the beginning. That's where I want that to be. I'm going to go to the end. I'm going to marquee my roto. Move it over. And maybe scoot that down, scoot that down. There we go. And then I'll just go in between and just make sure that they're staying in it. And they're obviously not. So I'm just going to come maybe to frame 50. Just pull it back a bit. Okay, so there they're staying in. A little bit more back. Alright, so for the most part they're in there. If we need to adjust it, we can adjust it later as well. Okay. So now I'm going to go in here and I'm going to add in another keyer. So I clicked on the roto and I'm going to add in Primat, which is the other keyer. Okay. Now again, we have the background swatch here, but there's no other ones. There's this other thing here for mask. We don't need that. So for Primat, we're going to say, leave those there, leave those there. My mask is going to be my alpha. Okay. So as I hit, as I start doing my Primat stuff, it'll read that in. So select background color. That's where this one starts. So I hit Control Shift. I click on a background color. And what it's going to do is it's going to pull that color off. Okay, so I'm going to use Control Alt Shift and just try to pick, where's the one that's going to give me the best results. Okay, right about there, I'm probably getting the best results. Maybe not. No, I guess it was about there. Look at that. Okay, So you want to click around just to kind of get an idea of where are you going to get the best mask. Actually, but down here seemed pretty good. Right about there. Okay. All right, so that pulls the character off of there somewhat, but you can still see if I crank this up that we're still getting that masking is not fully there. Okay. So then this one starts at the top, and again, we work our way down. So the first one is clean background noise. So I'm going to use clean background noise, use Control Shift, and just drag a box. And what this does is it's reading the information in the box and saying, okay, these are also part of that greenish color, so you want to remove those. So I'm going to Control click, hit A to see the alpha channel. I can see that it's removed a lot of this. You can also see these little square boxes. This is where the compression of the video file is coming in, and we're really kind of seeing some of this stuff. So you may not want to use this type of footage, but I'm just kind of giving you an idea of what is possible. So because I can't really see it too good, I'm going to use this in my alpha mode. So I just hit A, and I'm just using Control Shift, which kind of marquee a lot of these areas here that we don't necessarily want. Okay, and remember, this isn't going to be just like a few clicks. Our other ones, we kind of got lucky where, it worked out pretty good. But sometimes you'll spend hours and hours trying to get a good key off of your subject, right? So there we go. We've kind of pulled her off of it, but now we have this weird like fringe going around the edge. There is this degrain that we can also adjust. And what the degrain is going to do is it's going to try to get rid of a lot of the grain, a lot of the noise, and not give us any weird results. But you can see, if the second I turn that on, we're getting this stuff where it's just kind of popping inward. Okay, so we'll use it and we'll just see what happens. We'll leave it on small right now. So I clean the background noise. I can also clean the foreground noise, which is this stuff. I hold Control Shift, and I just are marking these areas that are on the actual character. Now you'll see that they're not doing anything on here. Now because we've cleaned part of the background noise, some of those background colors that we picked actually were picked up in the clothing. So it's not recognizing those things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say reset my Primat. Okay? And I'll show you, oops, reset it again, that this color green that's right here, if you look at just the swatch that's right there, okay, you can see how that color green is very close to some of these other shades of green that we're picking up in here. And it might even be like something, way off in this little area. Okay, so sometimes what I like to do before I do my my primats and all that is I'll run a grade on this, go into my multiplying, and I'll kind of boost my greens. Okay, now it's boosting all of my greens, so I may also want to take my reds and blues and give those a boost as well, just to help kind of maybe isolate some of it that's being pulled off. But again, you have to be aware of, you can only do this so far, because now we're picking up some greens in our coat that we probably don't really want. So I actually may be going too far with this grade. And this just could be a piece of footage that if you look at it is very, very grainy as we're looking at a lot of the stuff. There's a lot of compression here. It's not a very clean piece of footage. Okay. So I'm going to ignore the grade for this, and this piece of footage most likely is not going to work for as clean as we may want this. All right. So again, I'm going to do my select background color. Green. Just using Control Alt and Shift. All right, we'll start there again. Go to clean background noise. Okay. Now once I start doing this, I can't like undo that. Okay. If I hit Control Z, and nothing's gonna happen. Clean foreground noise. Let's just go in here and clean up some of this foreground stuff. That degraining is not really doing us any favors in here. Alright, let's go down to fine tuning here. And we can adjust these fine tuning sliders, and sometimes we'll get good results. And that's not what we want. And this file not really doing anything. There's other stuff inside here, spilling and whatever else. You can really look at some of the settings and play with them. Spill is this green stuff that we're getting on here. It's when the green of the background is kind of splashing onto our character. So we can just go to spill minus and just kind of control click around, and what it's going to do is it's going to get rid of that spill. Now what it's doing here is it's actually filling it. If we go to the replace with, it's replacing it with a complement color. So it's replacing it with purple. So I could say replace it with a solid color, and I could pick that solid color it replaces it with. Okay, or I can say the complement. And the goal of replacing it with complement is that it cancels it out. Okay, so if I've gone too much, then I can, spill increase and pull some of those values back in. I can go to spill sponge and try to pull up some of these. I can increase my matte. If I see I have an area that maybe needs to be a little bit more opaque, or I can decrease my matte if I see an area that needs to be less opaque. I'm just control and just clicking. And I can draw a box here and it'll make it a little bit easier. Okay, so depending on your footage, you're going to get mixed results. Okay, so using these Cynthia ones are actually really good because you can see how easy and nice we're able to pull off this using different keying solutions. Okay, even Primat would do a good job on that. Primat's actually a very, very good keyer. It's just this piece of footage is just that grainy and that noisy that we're getting this kind of like funky stuff here. It's hard for it to pick it up. Okay, and there's a lot of green that's like splashing onto the character. So here it's a lot nicer. The green's a lot more vivid. We can use that. So I'm going to use Keylight and Ultimatte over here. See, we have a little bit different results as well for these. Okay. But again, Primat's another one you can kind of play around with and see. Okay. So now, what's the assignment? What do we actually want to do with all of this knowledge that we have? Well, we're going to construct a scene. Okay. So here is, I'm just going to grab one of these images, like, let's see which one I want to use. Okay, this orangey one. All right, let's say we use the orangey one. So I'm just going to copy this over here and paste it. Okay. Stick that there. And I'm going to use Cynthia, so I'm just going to borrow Cynthia, and I'm just going to grab this whole chain here and just copy and paste it. Okay. So we're going to put Cynthia inside this scene. So again, we have Cynthia. We've created that inner matte. We've dilated it, and then we popped it into Keylight. And then we're just going to merge these two things together. Okay. Now sometimes your stuff is going to be as simple as that. As simple as, there it is. Okay, there's Cynthia right there. But sometimes you want it to be a bit more involved. Let's add a transform on her just to make her more in scale with what she should be. It's actually not very good. Okay, and remember we never actually scaled her outward. She's still at, if we look at this, she's still at that 530 by 980. And if we remember from here, it wanted her to be at 795 by 980. Okay. So I'm going to reformat her. And this is actually not going to affect anything down the chain, which is why I saved it until afterwards. Is that I'm going to go here, hit tab, and then type in reformat. And 795 by 980 is what we want to reformat her to. So I'm going to go to my output format and say new. And I'll just give this a new one called Cynthia. 795 by 980. Okay. And right now it's not really doing anything. If I disable it, re-enable it, you can see it's just kind of like cropping it a little bit, if anything. So what I want to do is change this from width to distort. Okay. So now it looks like it's shrinking her, but it's not. It's actually just how it's filling the screen. Okay, so that's her proper height. So now if we go back to the keyer, okay, the keyer is still applying. The dilate is still applying. The key light is still applying. And our transform and our merge are still applying. So there she is. Okay. Now she's actually, for her to be this close to the screen, she's actually a bit too fuzzy. Okay. So as you work in stuff and we're trying to composite and put these things together, we have to figure out, where does she really belong in this scene? Maybe she belongs back here a bit. Okay. Now, again, we can take this, and we're going to add a grade to her, because she doesn't really look like she's in the scene. And if I look at the lighting around her, let's move my mouse over one of these things. And you see that we have a lot of red, 0.22 red, 0.05 green, and 0.0036 blue. So we have a lot of red, a quarter of the orange, or the green, and then maybe even a quarter of the blue from the green. All right. So what I need to do is I need to boost her so that she is more in that realm. Because right now she's very monochromatic. She's very 0.06, 006, 006, 007. Okay. So I'm going to go to, if I go to gain, you can see how I can just adjust her. Some of these do not work like that, like lift. Oops, gain back to 1. Lift is actually going to lift the entire thing. So I don't want to play with lift. I want to use gain for this one. I'm going to click on here. And like I said, I want her reds to be more prevalent than the other stuff. And then her green, as I look at this now, I can see her reds are 0.01. Her greens are 0.006, so I want to boost her greens as well. Okay, maybe take the blues down a little bit. Okay, so now she's kind of in that same realm color tone that we had. The other thing we can do, let's go back to the grade and just reset this, is that we can actually go to the black point, and I can say, okay, well, what's the black point of her? It should be this color. And then what's the white point? Okay, well, what's the white in here? It's these lights. Okay. And then I would go to lift. Oops. So I can't use lift for that. I go to gain. And I can kind of poke around until I find a good color match. Something like that might even work. Okay. So you can see how there's different ways to kind of match her color to the scene's color. And if I decide my black was just not the right black, I could always come back and kind of pick a different black. Okay, or I can just go in here and just kind of tweak these things manually. Maybe be careful when you do that, though, that you don't go in the wrong direction. Okay, she still has a sharp edge around her, so I'm actually going to come into right after the key light. And I'm going to add a road, blur. I'm just going to fuzz this out a bit. There we go. Okay. Now you'll also notice that on her, if we look at her skin tone and we look at this wall here, there's a difference in what's called a noise pattern. Every camera has kind of like this noisy pattern, especially a camera taken at night. So she doesn't really have a lot of noise, where this does have a lot of noise. And somehow she's a lot more greener than she was a minute ago. So let's go back to that grade. Okay, let's pick a different black point. There we go. That's a little better. Let me go to the white point. I'm just going to pick a different white point there, and then go to my gain. And you'll see that the gain that it picked is the blue is really low, the green is here, and the red is there. There you go. That's a little bit better. All right. So what I want to do is I want to add some noise to her as well. So I'm just going to go in here after the grade and add some noise. Let's save. And I'll say my mask is the alpha channel because I don't want that to be in there. Oops, sorry, it's not noise. Different program. This one is called grain. That's what it's called. Okay. So now on the grain, you'll see that we're actually adding grain to her. Here it is without the grain. There it is with the grain. So again, what I want to do is kind of match the grain that's in there. All right. And I'm actually going to go before the grade. You see that this is giving me like these really like weird red, green, and blue colors. So I want to color correct that too. So I'm just going to pull the grade down, go to the transform, and then add the grain in here. And that way it'll be kind of color corrected. Okay. So I want to look at this and figure out what the size of this grain is and apply it in here. So I think it's just kind of like half. So 1.5, 1.5, point. Okay, maybe not that small. Maybe the intensity is a bit high, so let's lower the intensity. There we go. And then what I'm also going to do is just kind of fuzz that alpha channel a little bit more. So I'm just going to go to blur. And let's try all just to see. I don't want that. Let's go to alpha. And I'm just softening the alpha channel just a touch. It still looked like she was kind of cut out a little bit more. Now another thing we could do to this is this light here might be having a little bit more effect to her in another way. So I can add what's called a light wrap. Okay, and this light wrap is I take an A and a B image, and like I said before, it doesn't matter if you remember, you know, A and B, whatever. You just kind of pop them in, and I'm just going to go set that merge aside. A and B. Let's view it, and you can see I went the opposite direction, so I'll just Shift X to swap them. No, I never pre-multiply, that's why. Pre-multiply, there's that. That. And the other thing we're getting is this original image is 3,000 pixels, and Cynthia is much smaller than that, so then we're getting this kind of weird issue where it's trying to give the light wrap to Cynthia, but she's really big. So I'm just going to go to this guy and reformat him. I'm actually going to use a crop node in this case. So the end result is going to be 1280 by 720. So I'm just going to say 1280 720. Alright, we'll use the reformat node. 1280 by 720, there we go. That's good. Okay. So reformat, crop, same thing. Alright. So now we're getting this intensity going around her. Ideally, that's what we want. I'm just curious why it's freaking out about where she's positioned. Because she's way over here. That should be fine. She should still get it. Alright, so my issue was that I didn't move, I reformatted this, but then I had to go back to my transform and move Cynthia back where she was. Okay, so now that I have her in scene, I can just put her where I want her. Then you can see how the light is kind of affecting her as she gets closer to the light. Some of that light's kind of wrapping around where she's at. Okay, so it just makes it look a little bit more realistic in that aspect. Okay, and so we have the reformat going into the light wrap to give us the light wrap image, and then this is simply the light wrap is just her. Like, what does she look like? And you can see I have to keep moving her back onto the screen so I can see that. Okay, now what I can do, instead of me having to move her back, fix it, and then put it back there, if I just take this transform off and pop it in right here, then we should be good. Then I can just take her and just move her where I need her to be. Okay, and then I can adjust the intensity of her walking around. Now, obviously, you have to look and see, okay, here's a sign. She's not going to be bigger than that sign, so if I wanted to stand by the sign, she has to be that tiny by the sign. Okay, now this gives us a very flat look to this. So the next stage that we're going to do is taking this into more of a 3D-esque pose. Okay, so right now we have Cynthia, and if we rewound it and play it, she's on the street corner just kind of clapping her hands along with the beat. Okay, but we want to add a little camera move in here just to make it look like there's more going on than just Cynthia clapping her hands over here to the beat. Okay, we want to add more of a scene to this. All right, so what you can do to start off with that is get a piece of footage from Cynthia's stuff, reformat it, key it out, and that goes all the way down to basically here. Yep, and then just set this aside, okay? And grab a couple of these Cynthias and do that to them. All right, now some of these are going to be a little bit trickier. The ones with the little flags, you're not going to be able to get that little flag stick out of there, okay? That's just going to be too difficult of a task, and it's just not going to be picked up by these things. So grab the Cynthia waving, the Cynthia hands. There's lots of different Cynthias here that you can use. Even something like that you could use as well, okay? So maybe 5 of them. So grab 5 Cynthias or so. And you can do that to them. Now you could also, once you have this whole thing set up, like this, we could also just kind of copy, let's copy this and paste it. So let's pretend this is Cynthia 2. I can grab all this stuff and just copy and paste it and just hook it up. There it is. And now if I look at it, it's going to look pretty good. I may have to adjust some things. Like if I look at this one, look at that one, they're pretty much the same. But I may need to just adjust maybe my erode. It needs to be eroded a little bit more or less. Oh, we haven't even pre-multiplied it yet, so that's why we're still getting that little band there because we haven't pre-multiplied, but that'll be fine. Okay, so you can copy a lot of this stuff over to that. Also, what you can do is get an image. So in this case, I'm grabbing this image here that I'm going to use. I'm going to incorporate her in this scene and make it look like it's more of a 3D scene than just a 2D scene. So if you wanted stuff like smoke in the scene, which I'm going to add, if you wanted stuff like, where do my birds go? Somewhere. If you want stuff like birds flying around, you can grab birds. There they are, the birds. You can utilize the birds as well. Okay. So once we have that, then we can go through and then go do the actual 3D part. Okay. So get that far, and then we'll move on from there to create more of a scene that looks realistic. Now try to find an image that doesn't have anyone in it already, so we can populate it with people, because it'll make a little bit more sense. Okay. Now it's not going to be a perfect fix. It might look a little bit cheesy, but it could look realistic if you spent more and more time doing those steps. Okay, so let's stop it there, and then we'll pick it up with the next video.